Hey guys, Boone down south here. Today we're going to do a review of the CVLIFE scope. Now I got a couple caveats to mention about this. This is the predecessor to the ones you see on Amazon right now. We're going to go through that. I'm going to show you the ins and outs, where we're at with it. I mounted it on my Wicked Ridge M370 and I've been using that and I put through the test. So stick with me, we're going to get to it. Hit that like and subscribe. All right, first thing, let me get this out of the way. CVLIFE contacted me into the 22-23 hunting season, or really during the hunting season, and wanted to know if I wanted to test out this scope, try it out, and do a YouTube video on it. And I said sure, but they couldn't get me the scope before the season ended. So I didn't get the scope until sometime in January, I guess. But in January, I went ahead and unboxed it, put it on the crossbow, tried it out. I did have a couple issues with it. I found a few things, some issues that I felt like with it. I went back to them. They told me it would be fixed on the next release. So I believe the ones on Amazon, some of these things have been resolved. I ran into some issues with their documentation as far as how to sight this in. And I'm going to explain all this. But having said all that, I killed 3 deer this year, the 2023-24 season, with this crossbow scope set up. I haven't taken the scope off my crossbow, and I don't intend to. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So I want to go through all this stuff and some of these issues. I'm going to show you about this scope. You're supposed to be able to shoot from 20 to 100 yards with it, kind of thing. Explain that a little bit more. So we'll get right into it. Again, this is the CVLIFE 1.5 by 5 by 32 illuminated crossbow scope. It's got reticles marked from 20 to 100 yards, and this is what we've got in the box here. Nice, comes with protective covers. Very nice, very nice. Looks good so far. All right, and then we also have batteries. So look at this, look at these 20, yeah, so this is 2032 batteries for the illumination if you use that. And then in this box we have, look like there's scope rings in here. So it does come with the scope rings. It's supposed to fit a rig or Picatinny rail. Which we have here. So we do got a cleaning cloth that came with it, as well as some instructions for the setup. Okay, checking out the scope. First thing I notice is you're going to have to pull the lens cap off where your eye's looking through in order to get to the focus ring. And you want to kind of pop up there and get that adjusted for your eye. And once you get it adjusted, you're going to really see the really sharp, clear reticles. And I got to tell you, what I like about this scope is that every marker is identified. It's got the 20, 30, and I'll put a picture up here so you can kind of see what the scope reticles look like. But I really like that because look, if you've been hunting with a crossbow for a while, you've probably done this. I mean, I know I've done it. Pretty much everybody knows hunting with a crossbow has done it one time or another, where they took a shot, factory scope like this. Typically it doesn't have the markings. It's got, your hash lines going down the line, or it might have dots, but they don't have the markings of 20, 30, 40. And they line up and they're like, oh, was that first line, was that 10 or 20? And they use the wrong line, or they're used to shooting 20 all day, and then a deer comes out at 30 and they shoot it at 20 and they shoot low, and it happens from time to time. And this one, you've got the markers right out to the right of the reticles there showing you what the distance is. And it goes from 20 to 100 and kind of gives you an idea what the gaps are there. It looks very clear, very sharp. I've got a really good view through here. And so I like that. You've got your elevation and windage adjustment. This is for your light, your illuminated light, if you want to light it up red or green in different settings. And the battery's in here. That 2032 battery would fit in here. A hair bit shorter than the factory scope. It looks like it's going to mount perfectly. Now, it does come with rings. It does come with rings if you don't have them. And it looks like it's the same size tubing, so I might be able to just use the same rings in the same location that I've got without adjusting those. It looks like it's going to be a nice fit on there. So we're going to go ahead, I'm going to put some marking, I'll put some tape where these rings are sitting on my scope so I know where this is. And then I'm going to go ahead and get this set up. So what I have noticed, the tube size, they are different in diameter. So I will be using the mounts that came, the rings that came with the CVLIFE scope. So I'll be using CVLIFE rings. And I'm going to go ahead and take this off, set this up. Looks like it's going to go in pretty much the same position to put my eye there in the right spot. So I'm going to just take some tape and kind of mark, put some tape on some things to identify where the eyepiece came to on this old scope, so I kind of line this up in the same spot. Let's get this thing taken apart. They did give you an Allen wrench for the rings. The only difference that I'm seeing really is it looks like when I mount this, the scope's going to sit a little higher. If you look at this with these rings, it's got a little bit of a higher reach than the other rings if I'm putting in the same spot area there. So it is going to set the scope a little bit higher. So that's just one thing I noticed here. So we'll see how it looks when it's on there. Okay, got the bottom of the rails mounted on, top's taken off. These are good and tight. That's how you want them. All right. And that should drop right in there very nicely. And I will say there is some grippy on the top and the bottom of the rails. So they do seem to be good quality rails because I don't know if you can see the texture in there. They are textured to grip your scope to help with slippage. So happy to see that. And I'm just going to line this up roughly where it was before. And it looks like, yeah, it looks good. It looks good. And you know what? I might like having it sit a little higher actually. So I'm going to start putting these back on, start tightening them down. And when you tighten these down, you kind of want to do it evenly, right? So you want to do a little bit tight, and they're snug rather, and then just start tightening them one, the other, and just kind of keep working them, because as you tighten this one, you'll be able to tighten a little bit more on the other one. So you just want to kind of stay even when you're putting these scope rings on, and that's just true of any scope rings. So I'm going to work on getting these in and getting this set, and once you're getting snug, that's when you want to set your reticle so it's sitting perpendicular to your main frame of the crossbow there. All right, guys, so we got the scope mounted on here, we're ready to roll. They say to start at 10 yards because, it's not like I've got a laser sight or a bore sight or anything like a typical rifle. So I'm just going to kind of eyeball down the rail of where I think it's going to hit the target. I'm going to shoot a little low to start with because it looks like it's a little high. But I've got the target set up right over here, and it's only 10 yards away. I got another target behind that just in case. But anyway, we're going to try it at 10 yards. Okay, so it looks like the distance was right on the money. I'm really surprised. My windage is off. It's a little off to the left. So we're going to get some adjustments set up and go from there. All right, so let's adjust the windage on this. And let's see here. It's a 1/2 inch MOA on this guy. So that would mean it would move one click would be 1/2 inch at 100 yards. We're shooting at 10 yards. We're going to have to adjust accordingly. So we're going to do a bunch of clicks here to make that same kind of adjustment. I need to move about 2 inches to the right ultimately. So this is different than some scopes that are FPS, and there's some differences. There's pros and cons of each one. So on this scope, if you look at the crosshairs, the dead center of the scope, that is the 50-yard marker on this scope. So let's think about when you zoom a rifle in, right? When you got the crosshair on something, the dead center scope, and you zoom in, you haven't changed the position of what that crosshair is lining up on. So that's what 50 yards is on this one. Other scopes I've seen have 20 yards at that mark. The idea is shoot this thing at 10, make sure you're close, move it out to 20, make sure your windage is good at that point and you're on 20. And then really you need to jump out to 50 yards. And then what you need to do is you need to sight this thing in using your windage and elevation on the scope at 50 yards. And I just started shooting at 50 now. And because 50 is the center of the scope, that does not change no matter how the zoom changes. 50 yards is always on once you've got that set. So once 50 is drilled in, then you come back to 20. And once 50 is drilled in, by the way, go ahead and screw your caps back on, your windows of it. You're not going to touch them again. Once 50 is on, you come back, shoot at 20. And the only adjustments you make are 20 is this zoom ring or the FPS ring. It's the same thing. And you're going to adjust that zoom ring, whether you're high or low, until you get 20 on. Once you've done that, you're going to go back and see that 50 is still on because it's still the center of the crosshairs was 50 yards. So if 50 is still on, now 20 is on. At that point, you should be good all the way through your range. But that's when you dial the FPS or the zoom range in. Once you have 50 dialed in with windage and elevation, then you can do that. And that's when everything should be on. So right now, I've just got that point where windage has been on for a while. I've been playing around, going back and forth to 20, 20, and 30, and I kind of figured out, and hey, this isn't how it works. So that's basically what we got to do. So I'm drilling it at 50 right now, and we're going to make sure this all works. So that's what you got to do. Okay, so I got 50 yards dialed in now. So I'm not going to touch my elevation or windage is dialed in. So now I'm going to go back and shoot 20. And then high or low, the only adjustments I'm going to make are in the zoom ring to get 20 on. And in theory, once that gets 20 on, that aligns up all the reticles such that everyone is going to be on out to 100 yards. So that's the theory. So that's where we're going. Two things I have a question about. So if I dial the zoom ring all the way to 5, which is as far as it'll go, your indicator here goes to about, I don't know, 430 maybe. It doesn't go all the way to 450. So I'm not sure if the indicator's in the wrong spot or if these are in the wrong spot. The other thing I've noticed is this piece has a lot of play to it. If you kind of notice the movement here. Okay, so back to shooting at 20. I'm about, let's see here, maybe an inch high, maybe an inch and a half high at 20. So I've got to adjust my feet per second rating to bring it up a little bit. All right, so my crossbow is rated at 370 feet per second. I'm using the factory arrow, the factory field point tip that they say is 370. But on this scope, it looks like it's probably about, 340, maybe 345 is where it's set to. And basically I've got it on this setting because I've got it sighted in at 50 yards, and the 50-yard reticle is the center of the crossbow scope, so it's not going to change as I zoom in. So I got 50 yards dialed in, I came back to 20, and then I just made my adjustments based on this zoom ring or the FPS ring here. And now I've got 20 on. All right, there's a 20-yard shot. All right, now I just did a 30-yard shot, check it out, and we're putting it in there. Okay, so these kind of scopes that you can get nowadays that you put on your crossbow, you're supposed to shoot like, 0 to 100 yards, 2200 yards, and all that stuff. First of all, it's not a guarantee that you slap it on your crossbow and that's going to work for you. It all comes down to the weight you're using, if you're using, what kind of arrow you're using, what kind of field point you have, all that kind of stuff. But basically, the way these scopes work, if you think about a scope and you got this reticle on here, right, with your hash marks, and basically the further you shoot, right, that your arrow is going slower. As it covers more distance, gravity's pulling it down, and so the farther it goes, it's dropping further and further. And that's why, obviously, when you're shooting, you shoot at 20 yards, you shoot at 30 yards, there's just a little bit of a difference. But when you go to 40 yards, it's a bigger difference, and 50, it's bigger, and so forth, right? And so the way you set these scopes up is you got to get 2 points sighted in. And so they want you to sight in the 20 yard and the 50 yard, and I'm comparing this to a Hawk brand scope. My buddy has a Hawk. It's probably more than twice as much as what the CVLIFE costs on Amazon. But that's kind of what I'm comparing it with. It looks very, very similar to the Hawk scope. It has the red and green illuminated reticle, which I love. Favorite thing about this thing. But I want to kind of think about this now. How you get this working? Where like, how do you get it to work, right, with this bow? Because I might be shooting a faster crossbow than this crossbow, but how does this scope work with my crossbow kind of thing, right? Because I'm using a different arrow weight combination, different crossbow, the crossbow speeds are different, all that kind of stuff comes into play. And how they do that is through the magnification, through the zoom. So this is listed as I think the 1.5 to 5 zoom, if you will. But really what you're doing is those hash marks of the different yardage distances, you're either zooming in or not, right? And your center point on most other crossbows is your 20-yard spot, okay? That's in the center of the scope. So as you zoom, that never changes. So on most of these, you would sight in your 20-yard, okay? Get that pinpointed in, and then you'd back out and shoot at 50 yards, all right? And then if your 50 yards is too low or too high, then you'll start zooming, changing the zoom scope. And you don't see it as a zoom, you see it as a speed. So on here, they've got it where it shows your feet per second on the zoom ring. And ideally, you'd start with that around the speed of what you're shooting at, okay? But it's not gonna be precise. So you adjust that, and what that speed ring is really doing is zooming everything but the reticles. And what that does is it's either creating a larger gap between the reticle, the spacings, or a tighter gap, depending on which way you need to go, right? But the key thing to this whole thing is 50 yards, or the 20 yards rather, is the center spot. That's where you stop, it never changes. So as you zoom the lens, the center of your scope stays the same. What's unique about this model, and they still have one model like this on Amazon, I'll put the links down for them, and there's pros and cons to this, but the 50 yard is what is on the center of this scope, which means your 20 yard is above center, right, and everything else is below. But the instructions give you the instructions as if 20 is your center and comes down, because if you're shooting too high or low above the center of your scope versus high or low below the center of your scope, depending on what reticle you're shooting at, what yardage point, it's going to change how you have to set it up. And that kind of, I came into a sticking point. I kept going back and forth with the manufacturer. I said, look, your instructions are wrong. I need you guys to look at this. You need to update this, And they're like, no, we ran it by the engineer, it's exactly right. And I'm like, no, it's not. I'm having to do exactly the opposite of what your instructions say to get this sighted in. Nevertheless, once I figured out the instructions were wrong, I did get this sighted in, and I shot this all the way out to about 80 yards. There's some advantages to having it higher. And that is when you're at that 40 and 50 yards, with 50 being the center of scope, you're kind of centered on everything. Whereas if you take one that's the 20 is at the center, when you get down to 50, you're at the bottom of the scope, so you can run out of space on your scope there, okay? So there's some pluses and minuses to it, but bottom line, they now have two of these scopes. They look identical, but basically they got the zoom range different set up now, and they have two different reticles, one that's 20 up high, and the one's at 20 at the center. So it kind of depends what you're going for, but just keep in mind, if you go with 20 above, which I kind of like, honestly, because it centers everything in your scope a little more. But again, if you're only shooting at 20, 30 yards, then maybe it makes sense to start at 20 at the center spot. So it just really depends on what you want, how far you're shooting, kind of thing. But in any case, I will tell you this. I have had this on my crossbow since January of last year, and I hunted this whole season with it, took this to Ohio with it, up and down tree stands nonstop, right? Everything's held up fantastic on this scope. Honestly, it turned out I'm really happy with it. It's a low dollar scope, if you will, in the realm of things, to add some capabilities to it. When I bought this Wicked Ridge M370, the stock scope does not have an illuminated reticle. And what I learned from this scope is, wow, it's amazing having illuminated reticle. It's amazing. That first half hour and last half hour of daylight, it is a game changer, guys. I'm telling you, it's a game changer. The batteries lasted very well on this scope. Illuminated reticle is great. What I will tell you is that overall, this thing is held up. It comes with a scope caps. They've been working flawlessly all year long. It's been working great. It's held steady. It's held on point. This thing has been very accurate for me. Once I got it sighted in and kind of understood what was going on and the instructions were wrong and got this thing sighted in, this thing was great. I mean, I can shoot it out there and it stays steady. It stays consistent. I haven't had any kind of scope creep or anything like that going on with it. So what I'm saying, I guess, guys, is it's worth checking out if you've got a factory scope, you don't have illuminated reticles, you want to put something on there where you can adjust your distance between the reticles, because maybe your factory scope doesn't match your arrow setup. Maybe you're using a heavier field point or something like that, or heavier broadhead, or you change your setup from factory and that scope just doesn't match it anymore, and you want to do something low dollar, because if I'm not mistaken, both of these models that I mentioned are like 89 bucks on Amazon. So that's a pretty good price for what you get on it, honestly. And like I said, it's held up the entire year. I hunted exclusively, except for I did a 3-day hunt in Alabama this year with my rifle. The rest of my hunting was probably 3 to 4 days a week for the entire hunting season with this crossbow. Saw a lot of deer this year. I killed 3 deer with this crossbow. Every shot was boom, dead on. So the reticle definitely helps. Again, if you want a low dollar option for it, this may not be a bad idea. Anyway, that's where it's at, guys. So hope you got something out of it. Check it out. I'll put the links down below. And y'all take care and have a good one. We'll catch you next time.